We're going to talk a little bit about what dysphagia is, and some of you maybe attended some of the other sessions, so you might have a context for this. We're lay people compared to some of the other speakers here today about dysphagia, but we'll have a brief overview on what that is. Then we're going to review some of the food textures. So I'm going to introduce the concept called the dysphagia diet, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll go into some of the tools that we use pretty much every day to do food preparation. And then we actually will do some food preparation. So we're going to share some recipes that we have with you and make them here, and then we'll actually have a little tasting. And then we'll give some advice to people in terms of some of the things that we do to make sure that the food is easily swallowed.
Okay. If you'll notice on the little PowerPoint thing, dysphagia is commonly defined as the difficulty with swallowing, or the sensation that food is stuck in the back of the throat or from the neck down behind the sternum. Normally, your muscles in your esophagus and everything would just squeeze and swallow and push it down without even you thinking about it. We normally eat and chew and do everything without even, consciously thinking. There's 30 nerves and muscles that are related to chewing and swallowing, 25 muscles and 5 nerves. And being that DM is a neuromuscular disease, you can see how this is very relevant. There's 2 crucial biological features that we need to be concerned about, and it's actually the food preparation and passage and protecting the airway. First, if you look at the first phase is oral phase, and that's the preparation of food for swallowing, and that's normally called the mechanical digestion or chewing. And there's several objects that help in that. Your lips help with that, your cheeks help with that, your tongue helps with that, and your teeth. So again, with DM, with 25 muscles, you can see why this is a very relevant part of, eating and swallowing the dysphagia. The second part of it is forming the bolus, appropriate size bolus. And when we're talking about a bolus, we're talking about the actual moving around of the food in your mouth. And what your tongue does is it will move it around, form it into a bolus, and move it to the back of your throat. And when the bolus is at the back of the throat, the tongue will lift up, and that's actually when the swallowing sequence starts. And that's where we normally don't think about it, is, the swallowing. The presence of the bolus on the back of the tongue, this is kind of small, and if you're like me, old age, you can't see it. The presence of that bolus on the back will cause the soft palate to move up, and that, closes off the nasal palates, and it'll cause the epiglottis to move down, and that will close off the trachea, so the food is forced into the esophagus. Okay, so that's just a simple little process of swallowing. As you can see, there's several mechanisms that are involved with the actual swallowing process. So there's several different ways that can be affected when you swallow. So for instance, we've got 6 brothers. One brother, he has difficulty with the actual chewing. He has the weak cheek muscles, the weak jaw muscles, and so after 2 or 3 bites of chewing, that it becomes work then. Then it's, how do you get it down? Another brother has a weak tongue, so he has problem forcing the food back to the back of the throat, and it's a constant moving the food around in his mouth. Another brother, the epiglottis will close over the first time, but it doesn't close over the second time, so it's the actual swallowing part that is difficult. And then I have another brother where the epiglottis doesn't close at all, and every time he swallows, he coughs. And with the one with the epiglottis will swallow the first time, he always takes a sip of water after every bite. How many of you guys do that? How many of you guys cough with every swallow? Nobody does that one? How many have the tongue problem? where it feels like you're constantly moving the bolus around. So it's the epiglottis one, the swallowing after every bite most of the time. That's what yours. Okay. And probably with all of you, by the time you prepare the food, eat the food, do the dishes, it's work. It's become a big ordeal. So.
Okay. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about the dysphagia diet. But before I do that, I want to point out two resources that we have here. So the photo that we have on here for food textures actually comes from this, and we have some of these handouts here. So afterwards, feel free to come and grab one. And then also the MDF cookbook. Both Regina and I have recipes in this cookbook, and they're for sale at the front desk there, at the MDF desk, along with other books and DVDs and so on. So I encourage you to take a look at that. They're $5, by the way. Basically, the National Dysphagia Diet was created by the American Dietetic Association, and they have created different levels of food textures. So I'm going to introduce that concept here. So both food textures and for liquids. So let me first talk about the 3 for foods, and then I'll go into the 3 for liquids. So the first level is pureed. So this is taking a solid food and making it basically a pudding-like consistency. And I think the demonstrations that we're going to do today will probably both of these, we have a soup and we have a hummus, both of these are going to be that type of texture. So that's the pureed. It's kind of like mashed potatoes. And for that level, you cannot include any raw foods in it, no raw vegetables, nuts, nut butters, or any food with lumps. The second level includes that pureed level, but it does allow for a little bit more textures involved in the food, and they recommend that all pieces be at least 1/4 of an inch or smaller. So if you're dicing up vegetables or meat, make sure it's that small to make it easier to swallow. With that level, again, and that's called the mechanically altered level, so that's level 2. Mechanically altered. And for this one, you're going to want to avoid any bread products or crackers, anything that's dry. And the third level is called advanced. And so this one also includes those first 2 levels, but it also then expands and includes soft, solid foods requiring a little bit more chewing ability. Cereals and bread products are included in this one. But they do recommend that you moisten them. So foods that to be avoided on this level, the advanced level, are things like nuts, seeds, popcorn. I think we all have experience with those for sure. So those are the 3 levels for foods. For liquids, which is the picture that you have on your handouts here, these aren't tiered in the same way, and I don't have as much experience with this, but I think depending, again, on your own abilities, some people can swallow more liquidy type liquids, and some people actually need it thicker. So that, I think, is a variable depending on your own personal situation. And so the levels for those are the nectar-like consistency that we see here, and that's like a milkshake. And there actually are, in this, when you take this, there are thickeners to help you get to that consistency. The second level is a honey-like consistency, and then the third one is spoon-thick or pudding-like consistency. So those are the 3 levels, both for the for solid foods and for liquids. And again, please come up and grab this when you are on your way out.
Okay, if you look at the next picture here, we're going to move on to some of the tools or apparatuses that we use that help in food preparation. My mom has become quite the master for preparing foods, since she did it for my dad and then all my brothers. This is her favorite tool. It is a simple little Tupperware steamer, and we have a garden. We grow most of our own foods, and she steams everything, because if you think about vegetables and how hard they are to chew and then swallow, she just puts it in the steamer. To try to stay a little bit more independent, my brothers sometimes help with the food preparation, and I don't know if you guys have this problem, with a handle on a pot is, it's just not very functional. So this is very easy, puts a small amount of water on the bottom of it, puts the lid on it, sticks it in the microwave. And with each brother has a different point of how far the food has to be steamed. Some of them need it softer, some of them don't need it as soft. So that's one of her favorite tools. She wouldn't let me bring it. She won't let it out of the house. I like the mandolin slicer. It's the next picture. And I have noticed with the brothers, if I chop the food up in smaller pieces ahead of time, then it is less work for them with chewing, after the food is prepared. So we slice up everything with the mandolin slicer. It's very quick. You don't just slice it up. It's less time steaming too. Plus what we do is we try to freeze a lot of foods, a lot of the vegetables, so we slice it with the mandolin slicer and freeze it in small packages. We also, have you ever seen a ricer? It's for mashed potatoes. It's just a round bowl about this big, and you put like boiled food in it, and you can just smash it, and it comes out in like a mashed potato type consistency. Yeah, you can get them at any kind of cooking stores. Ricer works. And another thing we have is an old-fashioned meat grinder. We grind everything. We put ham in there. We put everything in the meat grinder and just grind it up, and it's again, small, tiny little pieces. One of my brother's favorite things is the bullet, and you can get them at Walmart. If you have, yeah. Chris has even put steak in the bullet. Yeah, because he likes meat, likes steak, but can't chew it. So he will just cut his little pieces, put it in the bullet, blend it up. There's no buttons. He can press it with his hand. He doesn't have to worry about anything. So we use a bullet for a lot of stuff. Another thing we use is a Camelback water bottle, because being hydrated is very, very important. And with them, liquids, they tend to choke on it. We learned last year at the conference that when you tilt your head back, you actually open up the trachea a little bit, so you have more difficulty with swallowing liquids. And so I think she was an occupational therapist, was showing them how to keep your head forward and take a sip. So we found these. They're called Bubba Straws. I carry them everywhere. We can open them and pass them around. They're plastic, they're thick, and you can actually bite it, take a small amount of water in it, swallow. So you can control the amount of water that goes into your mouth. And that's why we like the Camelback water bottles, because it actually has that nipple on it. You keep your head in this position, you take a small sip of water, bite it, and you can control it a lot better. But anyway, so I can pass these around.
If you can open it.
If I can open them. Because I love these things. They're like $2 at Walmart. And each one gets a different color. Each one, you can see they're just very pliable. You put it in your mouth and you can suck up. And you keep your head in the same position. So that's something that we've used. Those are just some of our favorite tools. Okay.
Okay. And the next slide has some pictures of some of my favorite tools. Of course, knives are important. Now that's especially if you're an able-bodied person. And I've discovered that even if I go through kind of multiple steps in preparation, for example, cutting up chard. If I chop up chard first with a knife and then use a blender, or then use some of the other tools that we'll talk about, that helps. So again, there's maybe a number of different steps that I go through, but oftentimes I start with a knife. And you have the immersion blender, which is one of the things we're going to use today. This is probably the tool I use the most. I'll use it for everything from greens to mushrooms to soups to mashed potatoes. I mean, I'm pretty much, this is my go-to tool. And then we have a picture of a blender, and today we actually are going to be using the Vitamix, which is both, I mean, we both have them. I think that's your favorite tool, right?
That's my favorite.
And in fact, we're going to be giving away this Vitamix. So this was donated by the Vitamix
Get
company.
in the raffle for the Vitamix.
Yeah, so we encourage you to write your name down and give it to the MDF desk, and we're going to be choosing a winner later on today. So they're blenders. And then at the bottom there, this is the most recent tool that I've been using. It's called a Salad Master. And you actually take those cones and attach it to the device, and then you can put a vegetable right up against it and just grind it. And it has, each of those cones gives you a different cut of the vegetable. And I love it. It just makes it so much faster. It's kind of a mandolin on steroids. You could think of it that way.
Yeah.
So I think with that, we're going to move on to the actual food preparation.
Yeah. Okay. So this is my favorite tool. It's a Vitamix. Have you guys ever heard of a Vitamix? You just said, okay. I actually have had mine for 15 years. I bought mine when my husband had cancer and he was going through chemo and he couldn't eat. And so that's how long I've had it. And then I realized that it was good for my brothers, so it's just, and the reason why I like it so much is because you can control the consistency of it. Again, some of them like it a little bit thicker, some of them like it a little bit thinner, so, but they like hummus, they like, usually with a can or of beans, sometimes they have a lot of liquid in it, sometimes they don't have a lot of liquid in it. And depending on which brother, I will pour off the liquid. Sometimes I put more liquid in there because, again, they like it a little bit smoother, and I think I probably will. So I use an olive instead of olive oil, and then I have all my spices right here.
Sometimes you use different types of beans, right? Not just
Yes.
garbanzo?
I use every kind of bean. I use anything, well, actually, to tell you the truth, oh, I dropped a seed in there.
Oh, it's the Vitamix. It'll take care of it.
It'll take care of it, yeah. It does. This thing grinds up everything. I made some applesauce. The farmer down the street had an abundance of apples, so we just did a bunch of applesauce. And you know how she was talking about thickeners? Here's a bunch of samples of thickeners. Have you guys ever used them before? These things are great because you can, blend it to whatever consistency you want. Oh, thank you. And you can thicken it with that, and that's what I did with the applesauce. I put some of the thickener in it, and it came the best consistency, and the boys were able to eat it really well. I shouldn't probably call my brothers the boys, but they have been the boys for 50-something years. So we use this for smoothies a lot because, again, they don't, to keep up your energy level, you got to have food. And a lot of times it's so much work to eat that I just make smoothies. We make smoothies. And again, I'm lucky I live on a farm and I have farmers all around me, so we trade produce, and we have a farmer that has a berry fields, so he just gives me blueberries, strawberries, and stuff, and that will hide the taste of spinach. So I put raspberries, blueberries, strawberries in there, and then I throw in spinach and kale and whatever else I have. So anyway, you just put them on here. These things, it's got high and variable, and this thing will chop up anything and everything. You can, if you put it on high, it's going to like scoosh off everywhere. So I put it on variable, and you just kind of turn this little thing, and you can blend it like that's on the low level right there. So it's just low. If you put it on low, the consistency is a little bit more chunkier. So if you need like firmer food to move around in your tongue, you can put it on low. If you need the more liquidy food, then you just, that's what I like about this. Now the thing about this thing is it's all steel and metal. There's no like plastic in it. So it's all together. It's not like the other kind of blenders where you can take all the pieces apart. Yeah, this one you can't do that. And it is very sharp, so if you stick your hand down there, and I cut my hands all the time, but literally I use it every day, sometimes 2 and 3 times a day to make a meal, because you can make soup in here. I do tomato basil soup a lot, and what I do is I put a can of tomatoes and some basil, and I put some thickener in it, and so it's like a I don't know what kind of consistency it is, but it's not liquid, because again, if they tilt their heads back with a liquid, they get that cough, that constant cough. And so that's where I worry about them aspirating. So if I make it a little bit thicker, then they can put it in their mouth with a spoon. It's like pudding. It's like a pudding type consistency is the best thing that they like. This is something that I think is kind of cool. I learned a lot from Jessica and Leslie. I mean, we would get on the phone. My brothers have a hard time with bready foods, so I make like a cauliflower pizza. I blend the cauliflower up in here, put the spices in it, and you pat it out and makes a dough.
And the recipe is in the MDF cookbook?
And you can, now, sometimes I put a little extra, you have to really squeeze out the liquids in it to make it like a pizza dough, but it doesn't form into that hard bolus that where you have trouble getting it down. But they told me about seaweed. I was like, seaweed? You use seaweed?
California, that's like.
Yeah. And so I brought some seaweed. They sent me some seaweed, and my brothers love it. What they do is they take a little bit of this, roll it up, and make like a cigarette thing, and they can eat it, and it dissolves in their mouth, and they love it. They were just like eating it up. I'm like, oh, okay, seaweed. So if you guys want to try that, you
With
can.
seaweed
Or just plain.
Yeah, I like seaweed.
You like
I'm
seaweed?
a sushi fan, but
Yeah.
Well, see, they're sushi fans, but they don't eat rice. 'Cause rice,
It's everywhere.
yeah, it gets everywhere. They can't even make a bolus in their mouth. I can't open anything today.
Would you like to try some of these? Or
You try the seaweed.
You try the seaweed? This is great. I never thought about using it as a, but that's kind of the cool thing, and that's what we were trying to do is we learned so much from each other. Here, you can pass that over there. That we would kind of like, that was the idea of the cookbook and all of this, is you guys probably have some great ideas. Or, you come up with great ideas and stuff, so we'd like
Anybody
to
want
kind
to
of.
try the two together, or if you want to?
Now, my brothers like things spicy, so this is kind of a spicy hummus.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to the soup. So what I did was create a carrot soup, and the recipe is here on the side. One thing to note is the potatoes. Potatoes are starchy, and so I actually use them in an awful lot of stuff because it thickens it. So I'll give you an example. There's a recipe that I make where you take a head of broccoli and then two bunches of greens, so chard or spinach or something like that. Throw it all into a pot, boil it, but put potatoes in. And then you use this blender again, and it makes it thick. So you're getting that the great greens, but then also it's thick from the potatoes. And depending on how thick you want it, you can add more potatoes or less. So that's just a technique that I use with this recipe. So let's see how this is doing here. Good.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it's good. So I actually froze all the vegetables. I cooked them at home, froze them, brought them in the suitcase, and put them in the refrigerator here, and they were still frozen this morning. So I've had them in the broth here for a little bit. Well, let's go ahead and make that.
I'm
You
backing
wanna pull
up.
Yeah, so the only thing with this tool is that it definitely can splatter a little bit. So I think the key thing is that I always start on the lowest level. So this one has 10 or so different levels. So if you start on the lowest one and then move your way up if you need it. And I think with this one too, again, this is actually just a recipe that I kind of, every time I'll do it differently, right? Depending on what's in season and which herbs you like. So for example, this one we're using dill, but if you prefer thyme or some other type of herb, of course, absolutely experiment.
And again, with any of this kind of stuff, if you need it to be a little bit thicker, you can add the thickener.
Right.
So, okay. Other things we were talking about was just like different tips for cooks and non-cooks. So, like we were talking about preparing the food and eating and all of that. The thickeners was one thing, again, that becomes very handy. And you can get big boxes of these at like CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, any of that, and not just little packages. So you can get big boxes. And we talked about the spaghetti soup. Another thing that we do is we do cooking marathons. Mm-hmm. And it's where we'll take one day, and my brothers like this, we go outside and we grill. we grill all day long. We grill fish, we grill, whatever. And then we package it in small little packages and put it in the refrigerator. That way we don't have to prepare foods all the time. So each week they have, through the week we know, okay, we'll have this and this and this. Fish is a very flaky food that's easy for them to chew and eat. So we do a lot of fish. The other thing we do, do you guys have problems like opening things? Like I had, you can't open little stuff. So have you seen those things that look like shower caps? With the elastic, you got it? Okay. That is very, very handy. We put that over foods instead of saran wrap or the lids or anything like that. And you can take them off and reuse them. And you can get whole boxes of them at the dollar store. They're very inexpensive, and so that is another. My mom came up with that idea, and we use that for everything, because then that way my brothers can take a little container out, pull that off. They don't have to worry about getting the lids off, and they're a little bit more independent. And we try to make it in smaller quantities, because if they try to take big bites and try to swallow and chew and everything, it again becomes cumbersome. So we try to make everything in a little bite size or little packages. So we'll put the applesauce or their soups or something, and we try to make things that they don't have to warm up too much. That they can eat at a certain temperature. Either they just leave it on the counter. They use the microwave. They don't use pots and pans anymore.
Yeah, so I guess some of my advice is cooking, especially vegetables, twice or even 3 times. So steam them, and then, everybody knows that sometimes steamed vegetables aren't as flavorful as maybe you want. So take those, chop them up in either way you want, and then put them in a pan with garlic and some other herbs, and just get a little bit more flavor going. So that's something that I do all the time. And also when I look at recipes, I'll give you an example, lasagna. So usually if you make a lasagna with spinach in it, they just say throw raw spinach in it. I'll never do that. I'll always cook the spinach beforehand and then put it in. And then I guess the other thing too I wanted to bring up is those squeeze pouches now that you can find. So those are great. I've actually used those to cook. So I think they started out as kind of baby food, but now they have adult versions. But who cares? We can use the baby food kind too, right? But I've actually taken the vegetables from that and used it in different dishes. So you could make a sauce with it or something like that. So another kind of simple shortcut that we can use. I think that's it. Again, I do the marathon cooking, so weekends are the time where I'll make a whole mess of greens and other stuff that we can then take bits of it and use it in different dishes, or just by itself, of course. But that's kind of the technique that we use at home.
Again, I'm not for sure. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. But I know that the epiglottis doesn't fold over completely, and that's when a little bit of the water will leak, and that's when the reflex is to cough to get it out of the trachea. And so that's why they say if you keep your head in this position, that it is. So even with eating, we try to keep it at a consistency that they don't have to lift back, and you keep it at a firmer consistency. They can move it around and keep it. And then the other one is where we just did a swallow study on Lee, and his epiglottis will fold, and then the next swallow it won't fold, so it's like halfway open. So that's where, and it gets stuck. The food gets stuck right there, so he'll take a sip of water. And so we're going to try to train him how to swallow a little bit better, so that he doesn't. It's a bite and a swallow, and a bite and a swallow. So it's good. Solid things. Yeah, so you have to stay away from the more of the solid foods and go more to the softer foods. Yeah, and that's where you would have to stay away from things that break into small pieces, like rice and carrots and granola. So we don't.
So yeah, I'm going to plug the Dysphagia cookbook again. So $5 donation. And then we also have a number of other resources. So there's a link, I think, in your presentation to the Dysphagia resources on the MDF website. So there's webinars that you can view there, different books, a few other things, including a link to the company that puts this out. So again, feel free to come and grab this. And then there's also the MDF Caregivers group on Facebook, so we can continue the conversation that way. And then there are monthly caregiver virtual support groups, so if you're interested in joining that, Regina actually runs one of those, so maybe you can comment on that.
It's just, I don't know if you guys have this, we're the only people in Tennessee, I think, that I've met that have this disease, and so it's hard to communicate with other people. So Leslie has started a virtual online caregivers where we all call in at the same time and we'll have a topic we want to talk about and stuff. So if you guys, are interested in that, look on the Facebook page on the myotonic.org. I think it's on the Facebook page. They'll have different topics. And if you have a topic that you'd like to talk about, get a hold of Leslie, send Leslie an email, and then she'll find other people who are interested, and then we can, get together and talk about it through the year. Because again, you guys probably, like the honey bear, those are, you'll find great things that work well with you, and you can share that with other people that, just because this was by accident we found these things, and until I carry them with us.